Hello students, how are you all? Hopefully you are having an amazing day. I'm Mohammed Naeem Amin Bhatti and today we are going to discuss the novel written by Charles Dickens. The name of the novel is Great Expectations. It is a famous novel by Charles Dickens. First we have to discuss the characteristics of Charles Dickens novels. His novels are extremely important and basically the title are extremely important and its characters are extremely important. The stories are always important. Even the simple stories makes complex and through the different type of the techniques Dickens uses the suspense and mystery. For most of the times he rely heavily upon the symbolism, and he uses the symbol of fire, hands, mist, the river, the signpost, the in the Great Expectation. And also Dickens uses the comedy as the relief from the serious and unhappy sections of the novel, that is called the comic relief by different critics, and he writes from the point of view to the lowest class of living in the London and in the large cities. If we talk about the character list of the Great Expectations, I will discuss here the two characters only, the major characters. After discussing these characters, we will come to know the story and we will discuss the plot overview and the summary of this particular novel. So Pip, as a you can say the Birdingster man, is a great expectations presents a growth and the development for the single character, Philip Pip, better known to the himself and to the world as the Pip. So this is his nickname, and as the focus of the all in all in this particular type of novel, Pip is by far the most important character in the Great Expectation. It is basically a biographical sketch of the Pip. Actually, he is both the protagonist whose actions makes up the main plot of the novel and the narrator whose thoughts and attitudes shapes the reader's perception of the story. As a result, developing and understanding of Pip's character is perhaps the most important step in understanding the Great Expectation. So in other words, if you understand the character sketch of Pip and Astella, you will understand all the happenings of here in this novel Great Expectations. Because Pip is narrating his story many years after the events of the novel takes place, so there are really two Pips. The one Pip is immature in the childhood, that is the Pip, the actor, and the other Pip is the mature and the storyteller of this novel, that is the Pip, the narrator. So the narrator and the actor both are the intermingled, and that is same one Pip, but the story has been described in the two different ways, one by the character and one by the narrator. So as a character, Pip's two most important traits are his immature romantic idealism and his innately good conscience. On the one hand, Pip has a deep desire to improve himself and attain the possible advancement as a childhood, as a children in the educational, moral, and social standards. Whereas on the other hand, as a narrator, Pip is basically having the mature thoughts and all the essentialities which are at that time in his maturity. His longing to marry Astella to join the upper class stems from the same idealistic desire as his longing to learn and read his father. His fear being punished for bad behavior once, and understand ideas like poverty, ignorance, and immorality. Pip doesn't want to be poor, ignorant, or immoral at all. And by the way, I'm going to tell you that Pip is actually orphan. His father and mother were died before the novel starts. Pip, the narrator, judges his own past actions extremely harshly, rarely giving himself credit for good deeds, but angrily castigating himself for the bad ones. And as a character, however, Pip's idealism often leads him to perceive the world rather narrowly, and his tendency to oversimplify the situations based on the superficial values leads him to behave badly towards the people who care about him. When Pip becomes a gentleman, for example, and immediately begins to act as the things the gentleman is supposed to act, which leads him to treat Joe and Biddy snobbishly and coldly. Mrs. Joe and Mr. Joe both were living happily, but Mrs. Joe has not a good attention towards Pip. So after Mrs. Joe died, and after that Joe marries with Biddy, and Pip also thought to marry with the Biddy, but that was not going to work, and the great expectation of Pip are always demolished in this novel. On the other hand, Pip is the heart is a very generous and sympathetic young man, a fact that can be witnessed in his numerous acts of the kindness throughout the book, helping the Magwitch, secretly buying the Herbert's way into the business, etc. Magwitch is basically a robber who was arrested by the police at that time, and he was helped by Pip by food and other essential things, and his essential love for those who love him. Pip's main line of development in the novel may be seen as the process of learning to place his innate sense of kindness and conscience above the immature idealism. So he idealizes each and everything which is not correct in the practical life. Not long after meeting with the Miss Havisham, she is basically the you can say that she was raising Astella, and she was the ward of Astella. But Astella is actually the daughter of Mr. Magwitch, and now she is living with the Miss Havisham, and she is supposed to break the heart of the young people, and she is actually practicing it upon the Pip's heart, and Astella is cold and she is sluggish, and she is even you can say that more harsh to the Pip, as Pip love her, and Pip's desire for advancement largely overshadows his basic goodness. After receiving his mysterious fortune, his idealistic wishes seems to have been justified, and give himself over the gentlemanly life of the idleness. But the discovery that the wretched Magwitch is actually not that the wealthy Miss Havisham is the secret beneficiary of the shatters Pip's oversimplified scenes of his world's hierarchy. So at that time, when he comes to know that Magwitch is basically a secret beneficiary of his all the allowances, not the Miss Havisham's too. So he came to know this truth, and he then came to know that Miss Havisham is basically actually an eccentric millionaire and nothing more than that. The fact that Combs admired Magwitch while losing Astella to the British nobleman Dremel ultimately forces him to realize that once the social position is not the most important quality one possesses. So Astella marries to the Dremel, and then this behavior is gentleman has caused him to hurt and people who care about him most. Once he has learned those lessons, Pip matures into the man who narrates the novel, completing that he is the all in all character in the novel. And actually, this term is used as the Bildungsroman. So, after that, we study the character sketch of Astella. The Astella is a supremely ironic creation, one who darkly and undermines that the notion of the romantic loves and serves as the bitter criticism against the class system in which she is mired, and actually raised from the age of the 3 by Miss Havisham to the tormentment and breaks their hearts. Astella wins Pip's deepest love by practicing the deliberate cruelty. Unlike the warm, winsome, kind heroine of the traditional love story, Astella is cold, cynical, and manipulative girl, and she is supposed to break the heart of Pip. And Miss Havisham is quite happier from the Astella that she always do so. Though she represents Pip's first long for the ideal of life among the upper classes, Astella is actually even lower born than the Pip. As Pip learns nears the end of the love, she is the daughter of the Magwitch and also that causes convict and springs from the very lowest level of the society. Who was the Magwitch? Basically, that robber who was helped by Pip, his name was Magwitch. Ironically, life among the upper classes does not represent the salvation for the Astella. Instead, she is victimized twice by her adopted class. Rather than being raised by the Magwitch, a man of the great inner nobility, she is raised by the Miss Havisham, who destroys her ability to express emotions and interact normally with the world. And rather than marrying the kind-hearted commoner Pip, Astella marries to the cruel nobleman Drummel, who treats her harshly and makes her life miserable for many years. And in this way, Dickens uses Astella's life to reinforce the idea that one's happiness and well-being are not deeply connected to one's social position. Had Astella been poor, she might have been substantially better off. And at the end, Astella and Drummel, when they were living in a big state, and Drummel was quite cruel to Astella, and Drummel died at the end of the novel. Despite her cold behavior and the damaging influence in her life, Dickens nevertheless ensures that Astella is still a sympathetic character by giving the reader a sense of her inner struggle to discover and act on her own feeling rather than that of the imposed motives of her upbringing. Dickens gives the reader a glimpse of Astella's inner life, which helps to explain what Pip might love about her. Astella does not seem able to stop herself from hurting Pip, but she also seems not to want to hurt him. She repeatedly warns him that she has no heart and seems to urge him as strongly as she can to find happiness by leaving her behind. After that, finally, Astella longs. The painful marriage to Drummel causes her to develop along the same lines as Pip. That is, she learns through the experience to rely on trust her inner feelings, and she know about the kindness, what is the kindness and what are the soft-heartedness feelings. In the final scene of the novel, she has become her own woman for the first time in the book, as she says to Pip that suffering has been stronger than all the other teachings. I have been bent and broken, but I hope into the better shape. If we talk about the plot summary and we take an overview of all the plot, we will come to know the story of this novel. Pip, a young orphan living with his sister and her husband in the marshes of Kent, a countryside area around the London, sits in the cemetery of evening, looks at his parents' tombstones. Suddenly, an escaped convict springs up from behind the tombstone, grabs Pip and orders him to bring him to the food and the other files for his leg irons. Pip obeys, but a fearsome convict is soon captured away. The convict protects Pip by claiming to have stolen items himself. So one day Pip is taken by his uncle Pumblechook to the play at the status house and home for the wealthy dogger Miss Havisham, who is extremely eccentric, and she wears an old wedding dress everywhere she goes and keeps and all the clocks in the house stopped at the same time. This quite superstitious type of the women. During his visit to meets the beautiful young girl named Astella, who treats him coldly and contemptuously. Nevertheless, he falls in love with her and dreams of becoming a wealthy gentleman so that he might be worthy of her. He even hopes that Miss Havisham intends to make him a gentleman and marry to Astella, but his hopes are dashed when after months of regular visits to the Status house, that is the name of house of Miss Havisham, decides to help him become a common laborer in his family's business but not a gentleman. With Miss Havisham's guidance, Pip is appreciated and apprenticed to his brother-in-law Joe, who is the village blacksmith, and Pip works on the forge, unhappily struggling to better his education with the help of the plain, kind Biddy, and encountering Joe's malicious day labor. Orlick one night after the altercation of Orlick when Pip's sister was attacked by Orlick and known as Mrs. Joy is viciously attacked and becomes a mute invalid. From her signals, Pip suspects that Orlick was responsible for the attack. After that, he basically never forgive Orlick at any moment of life, and he also came in trance, and when he was also attacked by Orlick one day. So one day a lawyer named Jaggers appears with the strange news: a secret benefactor has given Pip the large fortune and Pip must come to London immediately to begin his education as a gentleman. Pip happily assumes that his previous hopes have come true. These are some great expectations, and he thought that Miss Havisham is his secret benefactor and that the old women intend him to marry with Astella. But in London, Pip befriends with a young gentleman named the Herbert Pocket and Jaggers law clerk Wemmick. He expresses the disdain for the former friends and loved ones, especially the Joe, but he continues to pine after Astella. He further does his education by studying with the tutor Matthew Pocket, who is the father of Herbert, and Herbert himself helps Pip learn how to act like a gentleman. When Pip turns 21 and begins to receive an income from his fortune, he will secretly help Herbert buy his way into the business and has chosen for himself. But for now, Herbert and Pip led fairly undisciplined life in London, enjoying themselves and running up the debts. If we talk about Orlick, he appears once again in Pip's life, employed as Miss Havisham's porter, but promptly fired by Jaggers after Pip reveals the Orlick's unsavory past. Mrs. Joe dies and Pip goes home for the funeral, feeling tremendous grief and remorse. Several years go by until one night a familiar figure breaks into Pip's room. The convict Magwitch, who stuns Pip by announcing that he is his secret beneficiary and not the Miss Havisham. He tells Pip that he was moved by Pip's boyhood kindness, that he dedicated his lift to making Pip a gentleman and to made a fortune in Australia for that very purpose. Pip is appealed, but he feels morally bounded to help Magwitch escape London as the convict is pursued both by the police and Compison, his crime partner. A complicated mystery begins to fall into the place when Pip discovers that Compison was the man who abandoned Miss Havisham at the altar, and that Astella is basically the Magwitch's daughter, and Miss Havisham has raised her to break men's hearts as revenge for the pain that own broken heart caused her. Pip was merely a boy for the young Astella to practice on, and Miss Havisham delighted in Astella's ability to toy with his affections. As the weeks pass, Pip sees that the good in the Magwitch and begins to care for him deeply. Only due to the reason is that due to the Astella, because Magwitch was the father of Astella. Before Magwitch's escape attempt, Astella marries an upper class loot named the Bentley Drummle. Pip makes visits to Stat's house where Miss Havisham begs his forgiveness for the way she has treated him in the past, and he forgives her. Later that day, when she bends over the fireplace, her clothes catches the fire and she goes up in the flames, and she survives but becomes an invalid. In her final days, she will continue to repent for her misdeeds and to plead for Pip's forgiveness. The time comes, and when the Pip and his friends to spirit Magwitch away from the London just before they escape attempt, Pip is called to a shadowy meeting in the marshes where he encounters the vengeful evil Orlick, and Orlick is on the verge of killing Pip when Herbert Pocket arrives with a group of friends and saves Pip's life. Pip and Herbert hurries back to effect Magwitch's escape. They try to sneak Magwitch down the river on a rowboat, but they are discovered by the police. Campson tipped off, and Magwitch and Campson fight in the river, and Campson is drowned there, and Magwitch was arrested by the police at that time. Then the court proceedings start, and Magwitch is sentenced to death, and Pip loses his fortune. Magwitch feels that his sentence is God's forgiveness, desire in peace. Pip falls ill. Joe comes to London to care for him, and they are reconciled. Joe gives him the news from home. Orlick, after robbing Plumchalk, is now in the jail. Miss Havisham has died and left most of her fortune to the Pockets. Biddy has taught Joe how to read and write. After Joe leaves, Pip decides to rush home after him and marry Biddy, but when he arrives there, he discovers that she and Joe have already married. So his great expectations once again comes to an end. Pip decides to go abroad with Herbert to work in the mercantile trades, and returning many years later, he encounters that Astella in the ruined garden at Stat's house that was once Miss Havisham's house. Drummle, her husband, treated her badly, but he is now long dead, and Pip finds that Astella's coldness and cruelty have been replaced by the sad kindness, and the two leaves the garden hand in hand, Pip believing that they will never part again. So that is the story of Great Expectations. The Great Expectations always comes to an end with the miserable thoughts, the things that we couldn't expected in our life. These things happen once again in our life, and the writer want to say that actually all the wishes in our life never come true. And that's it from today's lecture. Till the next video, it's goodbye from me.